At 10 a.m. the Superstation of Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, January 20th, 2019, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well. Today, we know that Dr. King Day is coming up tomorrow. There are going to be celebrations all across the country and celebrations all throughout Detroit. And unfortunately, a lot of the people who speak at the Dr. King Day celebrations never studied Dr. King. Imagine that. So on tonight's show, we're going to deal with the distortion of Dr. King's legacy, and we'll deal with the revolutionary Dr. King. I will be speaking at Second Baptist Church, the historic Second Baptist Church, located at 441 Monroe Street. In downtown Detroit, right in Greektown. I'll be speaking there Monday, January 21st, 2019. 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. is the event. It's free and open to the public. Bring the family. And you don't want to miss that, because I'll deal with the revolutionary Dr. King. I'll deal with how his legacy has been distorted. Okay, so we'll talk some about that. All right. So hope everybody's doing well. You know, it's been a very, very busy week. We'll talk a little bit about some of the things that have been going on this past week. We know this is day 30 of Donald Trump's shutdown, okay? And we know he did an address yesterday. Wasn't much of a deal. He didn't offer a whole lot. But we know that the shutdown continues. And then we saw today that Vice President Pence was interviewed, and he had the nerve to compare Donald Trump to Dr. King. He had the nerve to compare Donald Trump to Dr. King. Did you see that? Now, besides them both being men and them both cheating on their wives, I don't understand what the comparison is. I really don't. There is no comparison. Okay, but Mike Pence had the nerve to use Dr. King and Donald Trump's name in the same sentence. All right, so we'll talk some about that. But on tonight's show, we'll deal with the revolutionary Dr. King. We'll deal with the Dr. King that was against the Vietnam War, the Dr. King that was focusing on dismantling white supremacy and racism, which is something that a lot of people don't want to deal with, right? We'll deal with dispelling some myths about Dr. King. Was Dr. King a Republican? Did Dr. King fight for a colorblind society? Really? You know, there's a whole lot of myths floating around about Dr. King. So we're going to deal with dispelling some of these myths. And then we'll also talk about the little known friendship between Dr. King and Muhammad Ali, the greatest of all time. Now, at the time, these were probably the two most recognizable African-American men in the world. And publicly, they seem to be diametrically opposed. But in private, they have a whole lot more in common. So we're going to talk about and then also we'll deal with dispelling some myths about Dr. King, okay? And then we'll be joined by Charles Ferrell of the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History to discuss the upcoming events they have going on at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. And also on Monday, January 21st, Dr. King Day, they have a Dr. King Day celebration going on as well at the Charles H. Wright Museum also. That's going on from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. I'll be over there also. Okay, I'll have a vendor table there. So we'll have Charles on at the bottom of the first hour to talk some about that. Okay, and then I'm going to share with you an interview that NBC News did with Dr. King in 1967. 1967. Now, this was before he came out in opposition of the Vietnam War, okay? Before he came out in opposition of the Vietnam War. But this interview dealt with beyond civil rights, and it dealt with the emerging Black Power movement, okay? Because Dr. King was not against the Black Power movement, all right? So we're going to share that interview with you because it dispels a lot of myths. And unfortunately, you know, see, one of the things I'm going to do in my presentation tomorrow at Second Baptist Church, and if you go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, we have the information on our website, right on the homepage of our website, about the event at Second Baptist Church. It's free and open to the public. Bring the family. Okay. One of the things I'm going to do is deal with Dr. King's speech. I have a dream. Okay. The reason why I'm going to deal with it is because people totally misunderstand the speech. The speech wasn't about a dream. The speech was about dismantling white supremacy and racism. The speech was about calling America out on America's hypocrisy, and it was directly dealing with the conditions that African Americans were dealing with at that time and still largely deal with today. Okay? This is what Dr. King was talking about. But unfortunately, in a lot of the Dr. King Day celebrations, they skip over the substance of the speech, and then they go right down to him talking about black children holding hands with white children. That's not what the speech was about. Okay, so we'll talk. So I'll deal with that on Monday, but we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. All right. Then also, I'm going to share with you the clip from the interview that Vice President Mike Pence did today, which was blasphemous. Him comparing Dr. King to Donald Trump and Donald Trump to Dr. King. And then also, I've been reading some articles and rereading some articles I have in my archives. But Republicans love to praise Dr. King while they dismantle his legacy. We're going to talk about that tonight. Republicans love to praise Dr. King while they actively work to dismantle his legacy, while they put legislation in place, while they nominate an attorney general who redeclared the war on drugs and nominate another attorney general who wanted to lock up more African Americans. Okay, while they have a senior advisor who's a white supremacist who crafts policies that are detrimental to immigrants of color, not just Hispanics, but African immigrants. Stephen Miller. Okay, so I find it very interesting that on Dr. King Day and before Dr. King Day, you have a lot of these Republicans who want to send out tweets and send out messages that oftentimes they didn't even write. One of their speechwriters wrote the message. And then they want to honor Dr. King. And then the other 364 days of the year, they're crafting policies that are diametrically opposed to what Dr. King stood for. You might as well just shut the hell up. You'd be better off just not saying anything, because you make yourself look like a hypocrite. So hopefully Donald Trump won't put out any tweets about Dr. King Day. He should just go play golf at one of his golf courses where he has undocumented immigrants working, like his golf course in New Jersey. He'd be better off just doing that. Just don't say nothing, because there's nothing that you've done the previous 364 days that fell in line with what Dr. King stood for. So we'll deal with that and a lot more on tonight's installment of the African History Network show. We're broadcasting on our YouTube channel as well. Let me see here. Okay, so on YouTube, can you all hear me on YouTube? All right, I want to make sure everybody can hear me on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep on YouTube. Yeah, we'll talk some about Dr. King's last speech as well. Okay, I've been to the mountaintop, which is another misunderstood speech. All right, I wrote it so on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, as well as our email newsletter we sent out today. We sent out 2 or 3 email newsletters today because we sent out one for the show. I had in there the article I wrote back in 2015 called "Why Did Dr. King Tell Us to Redistribute the Pain? Understanding the Power of Economic Withdrawal." Why did Dr. King tell us to redistribute the pain? Understanding the Power of Economic Withdrawal. Okay. And that's about a 7-page article in there, and it deals a lot with Dr. King's last speech. I've been to the mountaintop, which is another misunderstood speech. Okay, and so what the white controlled media likes to do is they like to focus on like the last 2 minutes of speeches. Okay, the I've been to the mountaintop was about 45 minutes, and we're going to play an excerpt of it for you in tonight's show. He dealt with economic empowerment. He dealt with telling the people there in Memphis, Tennessee, to go out and boycott white corporations. He talked about supporting black institutions. All this stuff in the speech. But when they show it to you, because you're going to see excerpts of it played tomorrow, I guarantee you, and they're not going to play that for you on the television. They're going to talk about him. They'll play the part where he talks about getting to the mountaintop, and we'll get to the promised land. They're not talking about, they won't play the part where he said, Negroes collectively have an annual income of $30 billion, and that's a lot of money if you know how to pull it. See, they ain't going to play that. Why? Because whatever's disseminated becomes imitated. So you have to understand weapons of mass distraction. See, I understand the media. I was trained in the media. Okay? So I know what I'm looking at. I know when I'm looking at weapons of mass distraction. Now, on the African History Network show, we deal with educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right knowledge corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the show. We deal with current events and history and politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also, visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have the information there right on the homepage dealing with the event at Second Baptist Church on Monday, January 21st, 2019. It's 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Okay, that's the last week it said it started at 2 p.m. That was the information I was given, but it actually starts at 1 p.m. So 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Okay, and it is called, let's see, this is the 33rd observance of Dr. King Day, the historic Second Baptist Church. You will have representatives from the Christian, Jewish, and Islamic faith communities will come together for a look back and plan forward to reinvigorate Dr. King's dream. I am the keynote speaker, Michael Imhotep, host of the African History Network show. There will be refreshments served. The public is welcome. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, for more information. Okay, look, we're coming up here on the break. You listen to 910 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio. Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right. All right, stand by, guys. Stand by. Let me see. All right. Hey, do me a favor. Can you turn that down in here, Azure, please? All right. I got to go get, he should be here. I got to get my guest. All right, guys. How y'all doing? Stand by. We'll be right back. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Calling numbers 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the calling number. Okay, guys, stand by. Stand by on YouTube. We'll be back in a couple minutes. Calling number 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number, okay? Stand by. We'll be back in a couple minutes. All right. All right, stand by, guys. Share this broadcast on your Facebook page. I'll be right back. I got to see who's out here.
$19 a.m. Oh, hi. Yeah, once we come back, he should be able to get to you. What's your name? Okay, okay, please hold. We'll be back from a break within 1 minute. Mm-hmm.
All right. Ready?
Ready?
Yeah. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, January 20th, 2019. And we are here. It's Dr. King Day coming up. And once again, I'll be speaking at Second Baptist Church, January 21st, 2019, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. All right, so I want to deal with, tonight we'll deal with dispelling some myths about Dr. King's legacy. And there are a lot of myths out there, all right? But I saw a good story dealing with the friendship of Dr. King and, let's see. Okay, and we're broadcasting on YouTube. Y'all can hear me on YouTube, right? I saw a good story dealing with the friendship between Dr. King and Muhammad Ali, the greatest of all time. Dr. King and Muhammad Ali. Now, this is a little known friendship. So in public, the men were diametrically opposed, but in private, they identified with one another. So in 1961, Cassius Clay at the time prepared for a fight with Duke Sabedong, Sabedong, in Las Vegas. Now, the 10-round boxing match was the young boxer's seventh boxing match, but his swagger and charm had already gained him admirers. So that day, the man who would soon become Muhammad Ali received a telegram from an unexpected correspondent. The telegram read, quote, "Your youthful good humor, physical prowess, and flippant charm have made you an idol to many American young people. May God protect you and your opponent in the coming contest." The telegram was signed Martin Luther King Jr. So it was an overture to an unlikely friendship, one that took place on the stormy stage of the Civil Rights Movement. Though it is uncertain how many times Dr. King and Muhammad Ali met during their lifetimes, they were friends. But publicly, the two men could not have been more opposed, and their secret friendship was only revealed to the public through surveillance files that showed the FBI had long been following both of them and monitoring both of them. So the bond between Dr. King and Muhammad Ali was surprising. But also Dr. King and Malcolm X, they mutually liked each other, even though in public it seemed they were diametrically opposed and there was opposition and disagreements on strategy. But overall, they agreed on getting to the same destination, especially when Malcolm officially left the Nation of Islam and joined the Civil Rights Movement. People don't even talk about that. See, that's one of the things I'll talk about at Second Baptist Church Monday, January 21st. I'll deal with Malcolm and Dr. King toward the end of both of their lives. Their ideologies were converging. And Malcolm joins the Civil Rights Movement when he officially leaves the Nation of Islam March 8th, 1964. And he helps to radicalize this. He helps to inject black nationalism into the Civil Rights Movement. That's one of the things he was talking about in his speech, the Battle of the Bullet. People like to quote the part where he talks about Democrats. They don't even understand that part. But they don't deal with the part where he's talking about joining the Civil Rights Movement and injecting black nationalism into the Civil Rights Movement. They totally skip over that. So when we look at Dr. King and Muhammad Ali, all right, the bond between Dr. King and Muhammad Ali was surprising. Muhammad Ali was the world's most famous boxer, but he was an outspoken member of the Nation of Islam, which was a black separatist group that preached non-integration and revolution. But that was the opposite of Dr. King's ideas of nonviolent protests, at least on the surface, because Dr. King also did use the Deacons for Defense and Justice to help protect civil rights workers sometimes. Okay? See, the Deacons for Defense and Justice are largely left out of the civil rights movement. Now, they didn't advocate violence, but they protected themselves from crazy white supremacists and bigots and KKK members with guns. But Dr. King, using the Deacons for Defense and Justice, not just for his personal protection, but also sometimes to protect civil rights workers, that's totally left out of the discussion. And every Dr. King Day, you know, I watched Eyes on the Prize, which deals with from basically 1955 to 1965, the documentary series Eyes on the Prize. I have it on DVD, ordered it from Amazon. And even though, you know, Eyes on the Prize is pretty good, they have good interviews, things like that. There's some real problems with Eyes on the Prize. First of all, they only deal with Malcolm X for 90 seconds in Eyes on the Prize. How do you talk about the civil rights movement and you only deal with Malcolm X for 90 seconds? And that's basically just an excerpt of an interview with Malcolm. No critical analysis, not dealing with how Malcolm helped to push people towards Dr. King, to help get the Civil Rights Act of 64 passed, to help get the Voting Rights Act of 65 passed, because Malcolm X was an alternative. People saw, well, if we don't deal with Dr. King, we're going to have to deal with people like Malcolm X. Okay? And then the Deacons for Defense and Justice is not talked about. The Nation of Islam is not talked about. Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That's not dealt with. Marcus Garvey isn't dealt with. And Eyes on the Prize. So there's some glaring problems with it. Okay? All right, so that was the opposite of Dr. King's ideas of nonviolent protests and what people call integration, but the real fight was for desegregation, which is a whole misunderstanding there as well. The fight was for equal access, not to give up African-American-owned businesses and give up African-American controlled schools and give up HBCUs. That wasn't a dream. Dr. King was an advocate for economic empowerment and African-American business ownership. So during the 1960s, the men found themselves on two different sides of a growing rift between Dr. King's civil rights movement on the one hand, and the Nation of Islam's turbulent vision of black power on the other hand. But if you read chapter 2 of Dr. King's last book, because Dr. King did write books, you read chapter 2 of his last book, where do we go from here? Chaos or Community? Chapter 2 is called Black Power. Chapter 2 is about his analysis of the Black Power movement, and he was overall in support of the Black Power movement, which gets totally left out. See, what happens is interlopers come in and they try to get us to pick sides. You with Dr. King or you with Malcolm X, right? Okay? No, we're with all of them, because all of them were fighting on behalf of the liberation of African people. Now, the people who are interlopers, who come into our communities and try to get Tamika Mallory to denounce the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and to denounce him, okay, to satisfy whatever need they have, these are interlopers in our community, because you don't see them any other time when things go wrong in our communities. They're nowhere to be found. Okay, so when you deal with people who come in to try to get you to choose sides between Dr. King and Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Marcus Garvey, we need to tell them all to go to hell. I'm quite frank. We need to tell them all to go to hell, because they don't mean us any good. And whatever money they're giving us has strings attached to it, so we will be their puppets. So when we have these Dr. King Day celebrations, we need to make it plain, like Malcolm said. Because Dr. King wasn't a punk, Malcolm wasn't a punk, Marcus Garvey wasn't a punk, Muhammad Ali wasn't a punk. So we have to be very clear. So we have to let people know, if you're going to come to our Dr. King Day celebrations, you need to straighten up and fly right. Speaking of flying right, we're going to have Charles Ferrell of the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History on in just a minute here. We're going to have him on in just a minute here. He's in the green room, so we're going to bring him in to talk about the what's going on at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. And they have a Dr. King Day celebration going on as well. They have other things. Other programs coming up also, so we're going to have him explain that to us as well. You don't want to miss that. Now, you know, last week we had Dr. Claude Anderson here on the show, and we also had Dr. Paul Finkelman on. That show is on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep, Michael Imhotep, on YouTube, and is also on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. And Dr. Paul Finkelman was at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History as well this past Tuesday. I was there also. We broadcasted that on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. All right, so in the studio here we have Charles Ferrell, Vice President of Programming for the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. Okay, and I know they have a lot of events coming up, and as I said, we're going to bring him on once a month to help support the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. So how you doing today, Charles?
I'm very good, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak to the Detroit audience.
Absolutely. Well, we have to support the progressive programming at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. And we have to also take out memberships. We have to not just show up with our bodies, but we got to show up with our dollars. So I know you have a Dr. King Day celebration coming up tomorrow.
Correct.
Okay, I'll be there as well. I'm doing double duty. I'll be a vendor there, and I'm also speaking over at Second Baptist Church tomorrow as well, and I'll be back over to the museum. So let people know what's going on at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History.
Every Martin Luther King Day, we celebrate his legacy through a commemorative breakfast. Our doors open at 7 o'clock. We have a breakfast which fortunately is sold out at this moment. Normally the breakfast is $35 for an individual ticket or $30 per seat at $300 per table. This particular program, we're featuring in the breakfast Reverend Joanne Watson, who will be opening up with prayer. We have an introduction of our president from the Alpha Phi Alpha organization. As you know, Dr. King was an Alpha.
Yes, he was.
During the breakfast, we also have a featured performance by a group called Organic, featuring Jill Hamilton. Dr. King made a request prior to his last request for a song was Precious Lord, Take My Hand. We'll sing that song. They'll sing that as well as Total Praise as featured performance for the breakfast program, which starts at 8 o'clock, ends at 8:50. We asked the community to come out for our keynote lecture. Our lecture topic is The King in All of Us, Igniting the Activist Spirit. The keynote speaker is Gloria J. Brown Marshall, constitutional law professor from John Jay College, City College of New York. She's author of The Voting Rights War, the ongoing struggle for NAACP's ongoing struggle for justice. She's also a noted playwright and a correspondent that covers the Supreme Court. She's on Executive Council of ASALA, and we asked for those who would like to hear that lecture, it's $15 on the King Day program, which the breakfast ends at 10 o'clock. Then we open our General Motors Theater and the whole museum to the community free from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Okay.
We have programming throughout the museum. For example, in our General Motors Theater, we'll be screening the film The Hate You Give.
That just came out late last year.
That's correct.
Right.
Followed by a youth panel discussion. Then we have millennial conversations, millennial as activists, led by Nigel Woods from Public Allies with that service group of millennials that help nonprofit organizations. Then from 2:15, we have an Alpha program that's always packed and outstanding, featuring Alphas. This is their 100th anniversary. This particular event, again, features not only history and step show, but features speakers of Alpha Phi Alpha. In the boardroom, actually from 1 to 2 p.m., the Alphas are having a discussion around the assassination of King. It was apparent that they were very intrigued by our coverage of the King assassination this past April 2018, was the 50th anniversary of his assassination, where we had Dr. William Pepper,
yes, I was
the
there,
attorney for Dr. King, who described the killing as a federal assassination, and along with attorney Carl Edwards on stage. So they're going to explore that in the boardroom. We have a film, The King, from Montgomery to Memphis, running continuously in our lower level in the orientation theater. In our multi-purpose room on the lower level, we have a youth engagement, young, gifted, and black, young hip-hop artists and spoken word artists around King's legacy. And we do have a youth area in our classrooms for young children making tapes
Right.
of King.
You said making tapes?
Making tapes, crafts that
Okay,
children
okay.
would make, Ring a Bell and Crowns of King, and featured covering books, again, for the young toddlers.
Right.
As you indicated, and as a vendor, we have a number of vendors, food vendors, informational vendors on our lower level.
Right. And
Starbucks.
we'll be down there also, the African History Network. I'll be doing double duty.
Yeah.
So I'll be there. My brother's going to be at my table there while I go over and speak at Second Baptist Church. Go ahead.
Fantastic. We also are featuring a young artist, well, I can't recall her name at the moment, who will be doing a live portrait of King, so people can see that in progress as a painter, creating artwork. And we have Tia Hana Amani, a fantastic violinist with an accompaniment group in our General Motors, I should say the Ford Motor Rotunda, from 1 to 2 p.m., 1
Sure.
to 2:30 p.m.
Sure.
So activity throughout. We also are bookstores open to promote King, and we are looking for increased membership. I'm glad you mentioned that, Mike. Since
Yes.
we're in a city that is the number one most populous African American city in the country, at about approximately 83%, 677,000 African Americans. Our membership needs to grow. It's at 6,800, heavily weighted on seniors. So we have a number of initiatives this year to increase membership and tie book sales to programs.
Right. And if they get it, so they can take out a membership tomorrow.
They
right?
can take out a membership tomorrow. Membership is $5 for students, young students. If you're over 62, $15. The general membership is $35. There's a range of layers for family memberships, institutional memberships. And so we don't want people necessarily to stop at minimum levels if they have the bandwidth and the capacity
Sure.
to support this institution. It allows us for more latitude around creating very dynamic programs. I just want to say that a couple, for example, we've had recently was the 50th celebration of James Carter, the great saxophonist, which packed our multi-purpose room. And yesterday we had the Women's March.
Yes.
The Women's March, thousands of people. I've never seen our Ford Motor Rotunda so packed, and we had a great scholar here at Washington as she begins to close out her monthly film series called the Wright Life Series, as we celebrated the centennial of Dr. Wright with the great Harriet A. Washington, noted scholar and author of Medical Apartheid. Michael, I am so excited about what we're embarking upon this year. This year, for a number of organizations, even though Africans have been here on this continent for many, many ages, there's a historical marker in 1619, in August of that year, where kidnapped Africans were brought to the United States.
Jamestown, Virginia.
That's correct.
Yes.
So Sala, for example, is on their website. They have 400 years of perseverance as their theme that we are in alignment with. Our theme is 1619 to 2019, resisting enslavement, fighting mass incarceration, our struggle for human rights.
Right. Let people know what ASALA stands for.
Yeah, ASALA is, and perhaps, Michael, you could certainly, an Association for the Study of African American Life and History. This is an organization that Carter G. Woodson started. Of course, he founded Black Negro Week in 1926, became Black History Month 50 years later,
Right,
1976.
Right.
It's a very strong organization of historians. We have a number of them who have been to the right, Robin D.G. Kelly, Gerald Horn, Sundiata Chowdhury, who I'd like to mention will be kicking off our annual lecture theme on Saturday the 26th of the same title, 1619-2019, Resisting Enslavement, Fighting Mass Incarceration, Our Struggle for Human Rights. Very important to note that a number of these scholars are part of our Scholar Advisory Board.
Right.
So when you see our programs, it's not really just an independent development. We are in conversations with our major scholars throughout the United States, and we've been noted as having the best programming in the country.
Mm-hmm. And I'm part of that Scholar Advisory Board as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So people should visit the website, thewright.org, thewright.org. They have the information there right on the homepage with the Dr. King Day programming. They lay out all the times that is taking place. And then we know the breakfast is sold out. So it looks like everything else is it starts at 10 a.m. Tomorrow.
Yeah, the breakfast is sold out, but the lecture has additional seats.
Okay.
We have perhaps 100 seats still open for our theater, which seats roughly 313.
Right.
The breakfast is 200 attendees. So we're asking for those to come out and buy a $15 ticket
Okay.
to support the
So they can
museum.
buy there at the door.
They can buy at the door as they come into in our museum store for $15 to hear the Gloria Brown Marshall again. You can go out and sample her on YouTube. Very strong sister. So in many ways.
Right. What time does that start?
That starts at 9 o'clock.
Okay.
From 9 to 10.
9 to 10.
Yeah,
Okay.
We'll open up with Lift Every Voice and Sing.
The Black National Anthem.
Correct.
Not to be confused with the white national anthem that Gladys Knight is going to sing at the Super Bowl. I want to make a distinction. There's a white national anthem called the Star Spangled Banner. There's a black national anthem called Lift Every Voice and Sing, written by James Weldon Johnson. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in many ways, for those who may or may not be aware, we're very strongly singing the song because it's the 100th anniversary of the NAACP embracing the song as a national anthem. That's 100 years ago, and this in part, as you note, if you have an opportunity to look at the programming throughout the year, we have a number of major issues, such as the Red Summer.
Yep, of 1919.
Of 1919,
Right.
100, and just a very broad, multiple city, 165 murders of African Americans in the United States. So we actually will be looking at that and just looking far ahead, such as other anniversaries as 1859, October 16th through 18th is really we're commemorating John Brown's Harper's Ferry.
Harper's Ferry, Virginia, yes.
Yeah.
The raid on Harper's Ferry, John Brown, abolitionist. We're coming, we've got a few minutes here before the break. Calling numbers 313-778-7600, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. Those on the line will come to you all in just a minute here. And if you have a question for me, I'll hold you over past this segment. But if you have a question for Charles Ferrell, you can pose questions about the programming going on, things like that, if you want to.
Yeah, I just
Go ahead.
I just want to note for a moment some very interesting facts. Is that King, like Malcolm, transcended the age of 39. They both transcended as long as with Che Guevara.
Right.
King and Malcolm were both in their movement for 13 years. King coming in 55 to 68, and Malcolm from 52 to 65. And they both were rapidly evolving.
Right.
So we break the tradition of the national narrative of focusing on King, I have a dream.
Sure, absolutely.
King called it a nightmare.
Sure, right.
And we, excuse me, would entreat the listening audience to review the book, The Inconvenient Hero, by Vincent Harding, who was a speechwriter that wrote the speech Beyond Vietnam.
Hold it up for the cameras.
Beyond Vietnam. This is the speech he made a year to date in Riverside Church, Rockefeller's church.
Right.
Against the advice of his colleagues and others, but it was written by Vincent Harding. And it's one of the reasons that the Johnson administration pulled away from him.
Right. Well, he was banned from the White House.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. He said it's no longer a civil rights movement.
Right.
It's a human rights movement.
Exactly.
And actually, by looking at this book, you'll see the confluence of his thoughts and Malcolm's around imperialism, etc. I apologize.
No, it's all right.
We have to dig deeper.
Yes.
To continue to study as a community so that we aren't, to use Malcolm's terms, hoodwinked and bamboozled into a state of, as he mentioned, that you could bleed. A metaphor appears that someone is in a dental chair and they have been shot with Novocaine, and they're bleeding and cut, and they have no knowledge of it, no sense of feeling about that. And I think the study of history allows us to have a more clear understanding of where we are, where we've been, and where we should go. I just want to also mention a program coming on the heels of our King Day is a collaboration the museum enjoys with the University of Michigan Musical Society. This is an organization that has some tremendous funding, 6 to 7 million for programming. We invite a number of their events, their performers to come to the Wright. On the 23rd, we have Camille A. Brown and Dancers. Camille A. Brown and Dancers coming for a dance workshop for our students, our youth. It's Wednesday, the 23rd at 6 p.m., a free event. And I also would like to plug at the end of January, Thursday, January 31st at 6 p.m., we're screening the film Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 11/9.
Okay.
Michael Moore is going to come in through the telephone and speak to the audience, and it's moderated by activist extraordinaire Maureen Taylor of the Women Welfare Rights Organization, partner with Marion Kramer in that regard. And so we're very happy to have that program, and then we'll kick off to what they're calling the Fabulous February Black History Month, because there's so many programs, Michael. I need to come back and detail.
Yeah, we're going to bring you back probably that first Sunday in February. Bring you back to deal with the programming there in February. Let's do this. Hey, let's try to get Deborah on the. Let's try to go to line 1 for Deborah. Hey, Deborah, thanks for holding. It's been kind of busy. Did you have a question for me, or did you have one for Charles Ferrell?
Either person can answer. Good evening. I actually live outside of Nashville, but I was raised in Memphis, and I went to UT Knoxville. So I was sitting here today feeling like, is anyone really interested in Dr. King? Because only about people really posted something about Dr. King on Facebook.
So your question was, are people really interested in Dr. King?
In the movement anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And are we continuing to teach our little ones with the same passion? And one of the reasons I ask is because I know that we had a unified movement back in those days, so that was easy. But now the issues are so varied.
Mm-hmm.
So
well,
it's like it's in a pocket. So could you speak to that?
Well, the reason why a lot of people don't teach about Dr. King is because most of them don't understand Dr. King. 1, 2, most African Americans were not involved in the civil rights movement. Okay, most of them were not involved in the civil rights movement. Okay, number 1, and you had conflicts back then as well. Okay, between different organizations, etc. Now there was more of a clear agenda at the time, but most African Americans were not involved in the civil rights movement. And today, the reason why most parents, the reason why most of our children don't really know about Dr. King, because they don't know about Malcolm X either, is because their parents in general don't know about them, and the schools are not properly teaching them. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we asked the community to come out, to organizations that are looking at Dr. King. I'd like just to share, if I could, because we're focusing on a youth conversation at the Charles Wright, where we have millennials as activists, is the title. Really pushing, as we did, to understand that the federal government's role in killing Dr. King. So there's new analysis that needs to be funneled to our children, because that's really the whole purpose of our work, is intergenerational knowledge transfer. Just for the listening audience, if I could, just quote a couple of quotes of Dr. King.
All right.
He said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter.
Mm-hmm.
An individual has not started living until he can rise above the narrow confines of his individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of humanity. I'm going to go down to a quote that I found interesting,
Okay.
which is,
and we have a minute before the break.
yeah,
Go ahead.
never forget that everything Hitler did in Germany was legal.
Mm-hmm. That's from Dr. King.
This is Dr. King.
Right.
Yeah. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for law. What we're encouraging is activism. Our process at the museum is to focus initially on reading, on literacy,
right.
on education, on critical analysis. Think for yourself. Don't believe what people tell you, and to because really in the United States only 5 corporations control the media. So
right,
what
right,
we get
6, yep.
is not really what is the absolute truth.
Right.
So as Malcolm said, we have to think for ourselves, think independently. Now, as our thought is, if you have done that work, then go out and make this world a better place.
Okay, we're gonna pause it right there. Hold the line, Deborah. We'll come back to you after the break. I'm gonna hold you over the break, Charles, so you can give last comments as well. Also, Dr. King also said the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, my own government, I cannot be silent. He said that. I think that was Beyond Vietnam. That was April 4th, 1967 as well. You listen to the African History Network show, 9:10 a.m. the Superstation of Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right, stand by, guys. Stand by. We'll be back in 4 minutes. Stand by. So I'll bring you back for a few minutes to wrap it up. Okay. I'll bring you back in a few minutes to wrap everything up. Okay, stand by on YouTube. We'll be back in a minute. Stand by on Facebook. Everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. The information about my presentation at Second Baptist Church tomorrow is there, January 21st. That event is 1 p.m. to 4 p.m., free and open to the public. You can also donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. And then also we have my Dr. King, my lecture that I did dealing with the distortion of Dr. King's legacy. That's at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. It's on DVD and digital download. It's on sale right now, $10 DVD. Digital download is $8, okay? So check that out also. All right, stand by. All right, let me see here. Okay,
This guy here, you hooked him?
Who is that? What's his name? And I don't think so.
Ngugi wa Thiong'o?
I don't think so. What does he do?
He's considered the greatest writer out of Africa. He was up for the Nobel Peace Prize of Literature 3 times.
Okay.
Yeah, what he stated was his brother was in the Mau Mau.
Oh, Mau Mau Rebellion, okay.
Yeah, and his other brother was killed.
Mm-hmm.
He was deaf, so they didn't hear it during the state of emergency to run.
Mm-hmm.
He was in prison and put in maximum security prison for writing a play in his own native language.
Okay.
Chikuyu. And what he found out was, he said, why was he put in maximum security prison? In fact, they gave him paper that was so hard that he took the paper and used it to write a novel called Wrestling with the Devil. I highly recommend it.
Okay.
I didn't know Jomo Kenyatta was a traitor.
Okay. Right.
They celebrated his death in prison.
Mm-hmm.
All the political prisoners.
Okay, just a second. Let me grab this.
So how long you been hanging with this guy?
Since like.
All right, we're still broadcasting on Facebook Live, so people can hear you.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that.
Yeah, sure. All right, guys, stand by. We'll be back in 2 minutes. How's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your Facebook page. They can hear you on my Facebook page, and I'm broadcasting here.
I see.
The station's page is muted because they're playing commercials.
Yeah, I'm glad you told me that, man. I could say so many things in here.
Right. Yeah.
That's like, I think there was one case where a gentleman was speaking on what they call hot mic,
Right.
and he wasn't aware he was being recorded.
Right.
30 seconds.
Okay. 30 seconds. We'll be back in 30 seconds. All right, guys, we'll be back in 30 seconds. Those on YouTube, how's everybody doing? Share this on your YouTube channel also. How's everybody doing? We've got Miss Watson, KOB, Felicia, a few of the people watching on YouTube also.
Tim.
Let's see if we can edit this. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. Yeah, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, January 20th, 2019, and we are talking about the distorted legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a person that people love to quote, but most of them haven't studied Dr. King, especially white Republicans. They love to quote Dr. King, but they don't. But the rest of the year, you know, after Dr. King Day and before Dr. King Day, they're working to dismantle his legacy. All right. So right before the break, we were speaking with Charles Ferrell, who's the vice president of programming for the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, and they have their annual Dr. King Day event coming up on Monday, January 21st. And they have the breakfast that's sold out, but you can still attend and get tickets for the keynote speaker there as well. That starts at 9 a.m. and they have programs going on all throughout the day. So we'll go back to Charles in just a minute to get more information about that. And then also, I'm speaking over at Second Baptist Church. Now, their event is 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. So you can attend both events, okay? There's enough African Americans in Detroit where both events should have lines wrapped all the way around the corner like Beyonce and Nicki Minaj and Cardi B were performing for free at both events, okay? I'll be over at Second Baptist Church. That's 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. And I'll be speaking there on the keynote speaker, 441 Monroe Street in Detroit. Their event is called Celebrating Dr. King Day. It's come together in divided times. Coming together in divided times. Okay, and it's interfaith. There'll be representatives from the Christian, Jewish, and Islamic faith there. I speak about 1:30, and I will be dealing with the distortion of Dr. King's legacy. I'll be breaking down one of his most misunderstood speeches, I Have a Dream. Okay, that wasn't even the original name of the speech. The speech was not about a dream. I'll also deal with the connection and between Dr. King and Malcolm X joining the civil rights movement after he leaves the Nation of Islam as well. Okay, so it's free and open to the public. Refreshments will be served. We'll give you more information about that. Also visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have the information right there on the homepage of the website also. We were speaking with Deborah right before the break, so I want to bring Deborah back on to see if she had any more questions for us, and then we'll go to the next call and we'll go back to Charles. Deborah, welcome back. Did you have any more questions, or did Charles and I answer your question for you?
You have a question. Answer that was great. I have one more question.
Go ahead.
We think about current issues that really affect us, and I really recently learned that there are more black people in prison right now than were slaves. So my question is there any hope for us? It seems like there's this thing that's excessive sentencing. That's a big deal, and also people who are in prison who are innocent. Is there any hope?
Let me ask you a question. One, where are you getting the statistic from that there are more African Americans in prison right now than were in slavery? In slavery, when?
Okay, you have a great point. Let me tell you, I'm a resume writer, so I actually work with inmates who contact me to write letters for them and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I've been doing a lot of research on juvenile rights, and I live in Tennessee, so I've been doing a lot of research. So actually, my mind is full of statistics and full of stuff. But I did see that as I looked, and I actually called to get an appointment with my representative who is on the committee. But
hey, Deborah, we're running out of time. Let me get right to the point. In 1865, when the Civil War ended, there were 4 million African Americans who were enslaved who were set free. When you read the Department of Justice report from December 2016, The U.S. prison population dropped to its lowest point in December of 2015. It dropped from a peak of 2.3 million down to 1.53 million. Okay, so what I'm trying to find out is what data are you citing that there are more than 4 million black people in prison now, because in 1865 when the Civil War ended there were 4 million African Americans who were enslaved.
Yeah, in other words, what you're saying is, the statistics don't line up.
Right, right.
That actually, according to Michelle Alexander, that there were more. She uses the date of 1860. However,
that's right before the Civil War started.
She also includes incarceration to a more expanded sense of anyone who is detained. That necessarily may not be in
house arrest, tether.
Yeah. The issue, though, is correct. The concern that the society has targeted African Americans for unjust imprisonment, incarceration, unjust murders in the street by police.
Absolutely.
So this is a major issue, and that's why our theme at the Charles Wright Museum is resisting enslavement, fighting mass incarceration, our struggle for human rights. And I would say, too, Michael, in terms of understanding the movement from civil rights to human rights,
absolutely,
I would say that that's where Malcolm was.
Absolutely.
Not to join the civil rights movement. He was actually, proponent of the human rights to take the government, as William L. Patterson did, to the United States nations that are charging genocide.
And from 66 to 68, Dr. King transitioned from civil rights to human rights as well, because he talked about the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65. He basically said the next step is to transition to human rights. Okay?
Absolutely.
So this is what we have to understand.
And that's always been our fight, quite frankly.
Right. Okay, Deborah, thanks for your call.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to line 2. Let's go to Leonard. Hey, Leonard, thanks for holding. Welcome to the African History Network show. Tell people where you're calling from.
Yeah, I'm calling from Detroit.
Okay.
I was down in Birmingham right during the time that children got killed. And I remember Malcolm X coming on TV telling those people that you can deal with Martin Luther King, or you're going to have to deal with me. I was at camp in Okinawa. I was military police in charge of the place and stuff. And he had pictures of James L. Ray. We were looking for him and stuff. So when I went down and heard Dr. Pepper talk at the African American Museum, I realized I was looking for the wrong person. That the federal and state police and stuff killed them, like they said, in the hospital.
Right.
And I had called Mr. Londonderry and put forth to him, because they won the case. The King family won the case.
Right. That was 1999, if I remember correctly.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And Londonderry said he didn't know anything about it. And it was in his... that's how I got down to the African American Museum. I read it in the Metro Times, and then went down to hear the lecture, which was real, right on point.
Right.
And I'm a criminal justice major.
Yeah, you're referring to Dr. William Pepper.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I have to say.
Okay, Leonard. All right, thanks. So Leonard, thanks for calling and keep listening. So Leonard was there when you brought in Dr. William Pepper, and we were discussing the plot to kill Dr. King, the plot to assassinate Dr. King.
That's his third book, actually.
Absolutely. Okay, so go ahead. You were right before the break. You were talking about some of the programs that are coming up. You were talking about February as well, and what else is coming up that you want to plug?
I want to do really kind of highlight the end of February, just to give early notice to the community about a very important program, speakers. The title of the two-part program is Decolonizing the Mind.
Decolonizing the Mind.
Decolonizing the Mind is a very important topic that's brought to us by Ngugiwa Thiong'o. That's N as in Nancy, G as in George, U as in unicorn, G as in George, I as in island. So if you Google Ngugi Wa, this is a gentleman that was really should have won the Nobel Peace Prize for Literature, considered one of the greatest writers out of Kenya, that was put in maximum security prison for writing in his own language. The fact that encoded in language is our memory. So why should an African writer not write in his native language, being actually versus being forced in many ways to write in the language of his colonizer?
Right.
Yeah, and Ngugi Wa is a distinguished professor of English comparative literature at the University of California. He will be here for 2 days in a lecture as well as a workshop with Dr. Gloria House.
Okay.
Asking to mark your calendars for the end of February, the 26th and 27th. I'm not going to highlight the programs, Michael, but I just want to let people know that we have a program February 1st, February 2nd, the 9th, I'm sorry, the 5th, the 9th, the 10th, the 13th, 16th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd, 223rd, 26th, and 27th.
Right.
This is the place to be, the epicenter of history for our museum, as well as outreach that we're doing. Speaking of Google, at Toyota,
Okay.
at
Really?
Detroit Federation of Teachers Union. This is a very broad effort that we have to take really serious focus around our history and to change the city
Absolutely.
and our community through education and action.
Okay, now people visit the Wright.org, W-R-I-G-H-T. Visit the Wright.org. They have a full list of programming there, information about Dr. King Day, what's going on there as well. If people want to bring you in to speak to their company, speak to their group or their class, what should they do, Charles?
They should contact Michael Imhotep.
They can contact me because I'll speak as well.
One of the great speakers. And
Yeah.
certainly contact Charles Ferrell. That's C. Ferrell, Ferrell, at the Wright.org. We believe in collaboration and partnership with this community.
Okay, excellent. Well, look, man, it's always good to have you on. We'll bring you back early February as well to talk about the other programming and what's going on at the Charles H. Wright Museum. And I will see you tomorrow also, okay?
Well, fantastic. Please come out for Gloria Brown Marshall.
Yes.
The King and All of Us, Igniting the Activist Spirit. Thank you, Detroit.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you once again, Charles. All right, everybody. Hey, I also want to let you all know that for the month of February, I will be doing a series of lectures at the new Nandy's Knowledge Cafe located at 71 Oakman Avenue. 71 Oakman Avenue in Highland Park, Michigan. It kicks off. So every Saturday, it's very simple. Every Saturday in February, 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., I will be doing a presentation over at Nandy's Knowledge Cafe. It's a free and open to the public. Donations accepted. The first week I'll probably kick off that first Saturday. I'll probably kick off with a presentation I've done before dealing with the history of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and then we'll also deal with some of our history of cooperative economics as well. So we'll talk some more about that next week. All right. So let's go back to before we brought Charles on. I was dealing with some of the history of the relationship between Muhammad Ali and Martin Luther King Jr. It's a little known friendship, Muhammad Ali and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, then I'm going to deal with dispelling some myths about Dr. King, and I want you to hear this idiotic comment that your idiot vice president made today dealing with comparing Donald Trump to Dr. King. All right, so before we brought Charles on, we were dealing with how Dr. King and Malcolm X, it appeared they were diametrically opposed, but they had a lot more in common, and they were actually secretly friends. Okay, so if we look at this article from this is from biography.com from January 14th, 2019, called Martin Luther King Jr. and Muhammad Ali's Surprising Secret Friendship. Martin Luther King Jr. and Muhammad Ali's Surprising Secret Friendship, written by Aaron Blakemore, Blakemore. The article goes on to talk about how both men had much in common. Both had grown up in the segregated South. Okay, Muhammad Ali growing up in Louisville, Kentucky, Dr. King growing up in Atlanta, Georgia. They were arguably the two most famous African-American men at the time. Dr. King for his protests and preaching and involvement in the civil rights movement. Muhammad Ali for being a fantastic boxer and being the youngest world heavyweight champion, February 25th, 1964, defeating Sonny Liston, becoming heavyweight champion at the age of 22 years old. Now, by the end of the 1960s, both of these men were two of the most hated men in the United States. Racists branded both of these men with ugly stereotypes. They decried Dr. King's insistence on the dignity and worth of African American men and his agitation on behalf of the poor. And they derided Muhammad Ali's insistence on black pride for his name change in '64. He announced it after he won the championship, okay, and they decried him for his resistance to the Vietnam War and he referred to the Vietnam War as a white man's fight. We know he talked about how no Viet Cong ever called me the N-word, and he refused to be drafted in April of '67. He refused to be drafted into, I think that was April of '67. He refused to be drafted into the Vietnam War as a conscientious objector. Actually, yeah, April 28th, 1967. He refused to be drafted to the Vietnam War. Now, April 4th, 1967, Dr. King delivers his famous speech, Beyond Vietnam. And that was his first public speech coming out in opposition to the Vietnam War. April 4th, 1967. Dr. King was assassinated exactly 1 year later, April 4th, 1968. So in April of '67, you had Dr. King coming out in opposition to the Vietnam War. And then you have Muhammad Ali, the heavyweight champion of the world at the time, refusing to be drafted into the army to go to fight in Vietnam. All right, so publicly, the men could not seem more opposed. Integration is wrong, Muhammad Ali said in 1964 when Dr. King was at the height of his visibility for nonviolent protests and calls to integrate African Americans into a white-dominated society. The real fight, once again, was not integration. The real fight was desegregation. We wanted first-class citizenship. We wanted equal rights. We wanted all the barriers to come down. The goal wasn't to give up our communities, wasn't to give up our businesses, wasn't to give up our schools, our HBCUs, wasn't to give up our fraternities and sororities. That was not what the fight was about. Okay, what happens is it gets reinterpreted as integration. Okay, and the goal was to sit on the toilet next to white people. The goal was to be able to live next to white people. That's not what the goal was. That's not what the fight was about. That's a misunderstanding of history. Okay, the African Americans were saying, look, we fought in all the wars. Okay. We shed blood for this country. We want first-class citizenship. We want all of our rights right now, not 100 years from now, not 50 years from now. We want all of our rights right now. Okay, so publicly, the men cannot have been more opposed. White people, quote, white people don't want it. The Muslims don't want it. I don't join integration marches, and I never hold a sign, end quote. This is what Muhammad Ali said. Now, meanwhile, Dr. King repeatedly declined to engage with the Nation of Islam and turned down an invitation by Malcolm X, the Nation of Islam's most visible figure, to march together. Quote, I totally disagree with many of his political and philosophical views, end quote, Dr. King said later. Now, one of the things I'm going to talk about tomorrow at Second Baptist Church is Malcolm was calling for a unification of the civil rights leaders. Okay, Malcolm sent a letter to Dr. King July 31st, 1963, the month before the March on Washington. Malcolm was requesting a meeting with Dr. King. He was inviting Dr. King to a rally in Harlem, New York. And Malcolm was calling for unification of not just the civil rights leaders, but also their followers. This is while Malcolm was still in the Nation of Islam. So this is not even talked about because the goal is to interlopers come in and try to separate the movements. Dr. King, in his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, page 133, Dr. King praised the Nation of Islam for their ability to instill black pride in our people, to rehabilitate criminals and things like this. He said he disagreed with their separatist ideology, but he had nothing but praise for them for the other things they were doing to benefit the African American community. So why isn't that talked about Dr. King? Why is there a concerted effort to try to separate the followers of Malcolm, the followers of Minister Farrakhan, the followers of Dr. King? Why is there a concerted effort to try to separate them? That's called divide and conquer. This is what white supremacy does. The same people who are crafting policies to demonize brown-skinned people and African people coming through the Mexican border are the same people who are interlopers trying to divide the followers of Minister Farrakhan and the followers of Dr. King and those who love Muhammad Ali. This is white supremacy. White supremacy and racism pits groups of oppressed people against each other to fight one another. But at the same time, these same people are not trying to build a wall at the Canadian border, because more undocumented immigrants come through the Canadian border than come through the Mexican border. But no, the majority of the people coming through the Canadian border are white. The problem is not white undocumented immigrants. They're not focusing on white undocumented immigrants who come here and overstay their visas, because most undocumented immigrants are not those running across the Mexican border. They're those who come here legally on visas and overstay their visas. If you want to talk about terrorism, well, 2018, 6 terrorists were caught coming through the Mexican border, but 41 terrorists were caught coming through the Canadian border. So why isn't Donald Trump talking about building a fake ass wall along the Canadian border, which goes all across Northern America? This is about white supremacy and racism. You listen to 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep, the African History Network show. We'll be back in a few minutes.
The day you lose your story.
All right, stand by, everybody.
Is the day you lose.
Stand by. We'll be back. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
9:10 a.m. Can I rename, please? Please hold.
All right, stand by, everybody. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Okay, so you had a clip queued up of what's his name? Mike Pence?
Yeah.
Okay. It starts at the 120 mark?
Yeah.
Okay. I may not get to all these clips.
Okay. 1 minute.
Okay. How's everybody doing on YouTube and Facebook? Three 313-778-7600 is the call-in number. Can you all hear me okay on YouTube?
30 seconds.
All right. All right, how's everybody doing on Facebook? Let's see here.
10.
How do we do this? Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It's Sunday, January 20th, 2019. We know Dr. King Day is coming up. Now, hopefully, on Dr. King Day, because a lot of people talk about, it's a time to reflect and, things like that. It's a time to study Dr. King. Because most people haven't studied Dr. King, including a lot of people who speak at Dr. King Day celebrations. I'm sorry. I just have to tell the truth. Okay, so it's not just a day to reflect. How you gonna reflect on something you don't understand? It's a time to study Dr. King. Okay, if you don't do it any other time of the year, that day you should use that time to study Dr. King. And then we go into African American History Month as well, and we need to study Dr. King there also. Okay, so right before the break, I was sharing with you the article from biography.com, entitled Martin Luther King Jr. and Muhammad Ali's Surprising Secret Friendship. Martin Luther King Jr. and Muhammad Ali's Surprising Secret Friendship. Okay, so you can check out the rest of that at biography.com. All right, now also, there was a good, so we know also, Dr. King and Muhammad Ali's birthdays were both in the month of January. All right. So Muhammad Ali was born January 17th, 1942. So we just celebrated Muhammad Ali's birthday. All right. It would have been his 77th birthday. And Dr. King was born January 15th, 1929. So this past January 15th was Dr. King's 90th birthday. Would have been his 90th birthday. All right, so they also had that in common. Now, face2faceafrica.com had a really good article about Muhammad Ali on his birthday, January 17th, 2019, celebrating his birthday. And it's called Muhammad Ali Thought Africa Was a Jungle Until He Visited. Muhammad Ali thought Africa was a jungle until he visited. And this dealt with how Muhammad Ali previously, before going to Africa, before going to Ghana and different African nations, before going to Egypt and things like this, he said some very negative things about Africa. But over time, he learned more. We know he went to the Congo for the Rumble in the Jungle, fighting George Foreman, 1974. But over time, he learned more. He was exposed to more history, more of the truth about Africa, right? And it caused him to change his views. We know he went to Nigeria, he went to Egypt, he went to Senegal, he went to Algeria, he went to Morocco. In 64, he ran into Malcolm X in Ghana, and this was after Malcolm separated from the Nation of Islam. There was an article that we posted on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, that dealt with how Muhammad Ali regretted not mending fences, not mending the relationship with Malcolm X when Malcolm separated from the Nation of Islam also. Maybe we'll talk about that next week. Okay, so when we look at some of the myths dealing with Dr. King, there are a number of them. We're going to do a dispelling a few of them right now. Okay, so two good articles dealing with this. One is from Donna Murch. Donna Murch, this was written January 15, 2016, 5 myths about Martin Luther King. 5 myths about Martin Luther King. This is from the WashingtonPost.com. And one of the most popular myths is dealing with a colorblind society, okay? And a lot of people say, oh, Dr. King was fighting for a colorblind society. And we also see that a lot of white Republicans like to quote Dr. King when it suits their needs also, okay? And what I want to do, I want to go to this clip here from today. This is Vice President Mike Pence, okay? He was interviewed on CBS News, in a Sunday interview on CBS News. And Mike Pence was talking about the government shutdown, all right? Here's what he had to say.
What the American people saw the president do yesterday was say, I want to set the table for us resolving this issue in a way that achieves his objectives to secure the border, end the humanitarian and security crisis, end the government shutdown, but also to bring together the Democrats' priorities to accomplish that. That's what the American people expect us to do. And honestly, the hearts and minds of the American people today are thinking a lot about it being the weekend where we remember the life and work of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. One of my favorite quotes from Dr. King was, "Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy." You think of how he changed America. He inspired us to change through the legislative process to become a more perfect union. That's exactly what President Trump is calling on the Congress to do. Come to the table in a spirit of good faith. We'll secure our border, we'll reopen the government, and we'll move our nation forward, as the president said yesterday, to even a broader discussion about immigration reform in the months ahead.
You've said that this offer on the table is not amnesty.
Pause it right there. Okay, so how do you say this is exactly what Donald Trump is trying to do? He said, you think of how he changed America. He inspired us to change through the legislative process. He was trying to dismantle white supremacy and racism. I mean, he spoke out against police brutality. But on the campaign trail in 2016, Mike Pence, who was the governor of Indiana, said he and Donald Trump thought that there was too much talk about implicit bias in policing and that we should stop talking about implicit bias. Really? He said, you think of how he changed America. He inspired us to change through the legislative process to become a more perfect union. Really? Redeclaring the war on drugs in May of 2017 by a white supremacist attorney general, is that moving towards a more perfect union? Attorney General Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, who Coretta Scott King wrote an 8 or 9 page letter to the Senate Judiciary Committee in 1986, when Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, who was a U.S. senator in Alabama, he was being confirmed to be a federal judge, and he was deemed too racist to be a federal judge. Coretta Scott King wrote a letter, and she said if Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III was confirmed to be a federal judge, it would dismantle Dr. King's legacy. Yet Donald J. Trump, who on the campaign trail asked black people, what the hell do you have to lose? And unfortunately, too many of us were too stupid to realize what we had to lose and didn't understand the policies that were put in place under President Obama, because we never read the document that I've been telling you about called Progress of the African American Community under the Obama administration, which is still at whitehouse.gov. Trump hasn't taken it down yet. It's still there. You should go read it, because a lot of these policies are being reversed. A lot of this is being attacked. The Department of Education, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Justice. So how could Vice President Pence, who hopefully will be forced to resign from office, just like Spiro T. Agnew was forced to resign from office 8 months before President Richard Nixon was forced to resign from office. Remember, Spiro T. Agnew was brought up on tax evasion charges and corruption charges. Vice President Spiro T. Agnew resigned from office 8 months before Richard Nixon resigned from office. So a vice president is not safe at all. Vice presidents can be impeached also. See, we need to study Watergate and all that, because all this stuff, this is history repeating itself. You think of how he changed America. He inspired us to change through the legislative process to become a more perfect union. You know, Dr. King also said the biggest purveyor of violence, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, my own government, I cannot stay silent. That still continues today. So I find it interesting that Pence didn't want to quote that from Dr. King. That's exactly what President Trump is calling on the Congress to do, come to the table in a spirit of good faith. But Donald Trump put together a voter integrity commission to look for voter fraud that didn't exist. Donald Trump lied and said 3 to 5 million people voted illegally. Is that moving toward a more perfect union, Vice President Mike Pence? Get the hell out of here with that nonsense. See, people like that just should not even mention Dr. King, because you haven't studied him. You don't understand Dr. King. You'd be better off just being quiet. Trump should not tweet about Dr. King on Dr. King Day. He should just go to one of his golf courses, go to one of his resorts where he has undocumented immigrants working, like his golf course in New Jersey, and just be quiet the rest of the day. So when we look at dispelling some myths, right? People like to talk about a colorblind society. All right. First of all, a colorblind society implicitly states that there's something wrong with your color, so let's pretend like it doesn't exist. That's basically what a colorblind society says. All right. So since his death, Dr. King has emerged as a triumphant figure, used to reassure us that the United States has transcended its history of racial strife. Of all the minister's powerful oratory, these words from his speech at the Lincoln Memorial in 1963 are some of the most cited. Quote, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. End quote. But interpretations of this quote are vary radically. Conservatives, including Ronald Reagan, have enlisted it to rationalize opposition to diversity programs. In 1990, African-American pundit Shelby Steele titled his anti-affirmative action memoir, The Content of Our Character, A New Vision of Race in America. But Dr. King knew that the economy was not colorblind, and he believed that the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts would not eliminate racial disparity. After 1965, Dr. King fought against crisis levels of black unemployment in the Watts area of Los Angeles. He fought for open housing in Chicago because he lived in Chicago for a period of time to experience the slum, to experience what was going on in Chicago. And in support of striking black sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee, where he was assassinated April 4th, 1968. At the end of his life, he became particularly disheartened by the racial barriers to housing and jobs in the urban North and West. Okay. Then also, so read this from Washington Post, okay, because I don't have time to go through all these. 5 myths about Martin Luther King Jr., okay? 5 myths about Martin Luther King, January 15, 2016, all right? There was also a good one from January 18, 2016, from John Blake for CNN.com, entitled, Debunking the Biggest Myths About MLK. Debunking the Biggest Myths About MLK, okay? And let's deal with this one. He was a Republican. Now, somewhere in America, someone is probably erecting a billboard that makes the claim that Dr. King was a Republican. It's virtually a King holiday ritual. Quote, it's one of those things that will never die, end quote, said Judge Legum, Legum, editor-in-chief of Think Progress. Because thinkprogress.org has a really good article citing historians and biographers of Dr. King, dealing with Dr. King was not a Republican, okay? So read that also. We'll pull up the actual name of the article. That's from thinkprogress.org, okay? Let's see. Yeah, the name of that article is No, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was not a Republican, but here's what he had to say about them, okay? This is by Judd Legum, Legum, August 28, 2013. No, Martin Luther King Jr. was not a Republican, but here's what he had to say about them. All right. So, quote, Dr. King never believed in any kind of party identification, end quote, James Baldwin says. Quote, he never allowed himself to become closely aligned with partisan politics. He occasionally said that both the Democratic and Republican Party have betrayed his people, end quote. The idea that Dr. King was a Republican is built on a historical sleight of hand. Dr. King's father, the Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., also known as Daddy King, was a Republican. Okay, and you know, we here on the African History Network show, back right before the November 2018 election, the midterm election, I dealt with the whole history of why African Americans switched from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. It was not because of the Civil Rights Act of 64, because by 1960, 2/3 of African Americans had already switched from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. So go back in our archives, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, click on listen to podcast there. Listen to the audio podcast is on our YouTube channel. Also, Michael Imhotep is on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network. Going back to 1928. Going back to 1920s, I dealt with the history leading all the way up into the 60s of how and why we switched from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. Okay, so Daddy King was a Republican, but so were many African Americans in the early to mid 20th century. Then the Republican Party was the party of Abraham Lincoln, the great liberator. The party identification, though, started shifting in the mid to late 20th century as Democratic presidents began champion civil rights. And it goes back to 1928, the Lily White movement in the Republican Party, led by Herbert Hoover, who was the Republican candidate for president, running against Al Smith, who was a Northern Democrat. Okay, it goes back to that, the Lily White movement, which was a movement to push African Americans out of the Republican Party and ignore their issues and ignore the rising Ku Klux Klan, all of that. It goes back to the Lily White movement. Go research that. Okay, so Daddy King publicly shifted allegiance to the Democrats when John F. Kennedy displayed public sympathy for his son. That was in 1960. All right, so read the rest of that also. That's CNN.com, okay? And then also they have another good myth debunked. Dr. King opposed affirmative action. Dr. King opposed affirmative action, All right. Remember the line in Dr. King's speech dealing with the content of our character, etc. Now, conservatives use that line. Some of them cite those words as evidence that Dr. King opposed affirmative action, but that notion is also wrong. Dr. King scholars say Dr. King may not have used the words affirmative action. The term was coined by President Kennedy. That goes back to 61 with President Kennedy. But he often supported the concept. In his book, quote, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, end quote, his last book, which was written in 1967, okay, Dr. King said, quote, he said, a, quote, society that has done something special against the Negro for hundreds of years must now do something special for the Negro. A society that has done something special against the Negro for hundreds of years must now do something for the Negro. That must now do something for the Negro is not give him jobs at white corporations. That's not what that's about. Okay? He cited a Southern Christian Leadership Conference program that sought to force companies working in black communities to hire a certain percentage of black employees. That's part of it, but that's not all of it. Because when you study the Poor People's Campaign, Dr. King was also fighting for a guaranteed income for African Americans, well, for poor people, period, especially African Americans. But there were other things he was fighting for as well, because he talked about how we were locked out of a massive land giveaway. In '68, he gave a speech in Mississippi, and he talked about how after the Civil War ended, African Americans were locked. These former slaves who worked the land for free for 246 years were locked out of a massive land giveaway of hundreds of millions of acres of land. Okay, so. Quote, he said, if a city has a 30% Negro population, then it is logical to assume that Negroes should have at least 30% of the jobs in any particular company and jobs in all categories rather than only in menial areas, end quote. But it wasn't just about jobs also. We have to dig deeper, okay? But King's sense of affirmative action was not something that only benefited blacks, James Baldwin says. Using the GI Bill as an example, Dr. King would often remind people that the U.S. government adopted a policy of preferential treatment for World War II veterans when it paid for their college educations through the GI Bill. GI Bill created in 1944. When you read How White Folks Got So Rich, the untold story of American white supremacy, which was put out by the Nation of Islam Research Group, they talk about the GI Bill in there, and they talked about how African Americans were historically discriminated against when it came to the GI Bill and getting funding for college, and how oftentimes we were directed into fields of study that really didn't pay a lot of money also. Okay, they deal with that in that book, and they deal with the history of the GI Bill also. How White Folks Got So Rich, the untold story of American white supremacy. Okay, but King's sense of affirmative action was not something that only benefited blacks, James Baldwin said. So he talked about the GI Bill. Quote, he was not talking about race-based affirmative action. He was concerned about need-based affirmative action, end quote, James Baldwin says. Quote, if you look at his call for an economic bill of rights, he was talking about affirmative action that benefited all people that were poor and deprived, end quote. Now, Dr. King distilled that vision in a 1965 interview with Playboy magazine, reprinted in A Testament of Hope, a collection of King's essential writings, after talking about the need for the government to adopt a multi-billion-dollar program for the disadvantaged of all races. He says, quote, at the present time, thousands of jobs a week are disappearing in the wake of automation and other production efficiency techniques. Black and white, we will be harmed unless something grand and imaginative is done. Okay? Quote, the unemployed, poverty-stricken white man must be made to realize that he is in the very same boat with the Negro, end quote. And this is what he was trying to explain to the guards there in Birmingham, Alabama, when he was in jail because of his participation in the Birmingham campaign there in in April of 1963, when he wrote Letter from a Birmingham Jail. Okay, he asked the guards, how much are you getting paid, on this job? And when they told him, he said, well, hell, you should be out here marching with us. Okay, because he was trying to connect poor whites to the struggle also, to show them, well, wait a second, you're being manipulated by this government also. You're in a similar position as African Americans. You may have a little bit more, but you're catching hell also. Okay, so check out these two articles. This one here is from CNN.com, Monday, January 18, 2016, debunking the biggest myths about MLK, debunking the biggest myths about MLK. And then there's one also from Washington Post, January 15, 2016, 5 myths about Martin Luther King, 5 myths about Martin Luther King. All right. We're going to go to this clip here from NBC News. This is from March 8th, 1967. This is an interview that NBC News did with Dr. King, and it's dealing with beyond civil rights, and it's dealing with the Black Power movement. Before we go to that, we'll go to that in just a minute. I want to give you these other I think there's 2 other articles I didn't have time to get to. There's a really good one from Salon.com from January 15, 2018. Here's how Republicans are whitewashing Martin Luther King Jr. this year. Here's how Republicans are whitewashing Martin Luther King Jr. this year. And then also there was one from thinkprogress.org as well. Republicans praise Dr. King while plotting to dismantle his legacy. Republicans praise Dr. King while plotting to dismantle his legacy. Check that out also. So let's go to this excerpt of the interview from March 8th, 1967. This was the month before he came out in opposition to the Vietnam War.
Civil rights, King, Vanoka, roll 20, sound 36.
Dr. King, this church is as good a place as any to go back over your commitment to the civil rights movement. When you went out from here into university and then you went to Montgomery, Alabama and started the bus boycotts there, what was the philosophy of the civil rights movement as you saw it then, more than 10 years ago?
Well, I would say then the philosophy was that we must go all out to use legal and nonviolent methods to gain full citizenship rights for the Negro people of our country. Now, of course, that particular struggle and that philosophy centered on breaking down all of the barriers of legal segregation. So I would say that in that period, the basic thrust for the gaining of citizenship rights for Negroes was to end the humiliation surrounding the whole system of legal segregation.
Dr. King, was there something peculiar to the place where you started and the kind of people you attracted? I mean by that, there was a strong attachment on the part of your parishioners in Montgomery to the church. They were older people, weren't they?
Yes, I would say by and large they were older people who participated in the boycott because they were the ones using the bus more than anybody else. And Montgomery was a community predominantly church-centered, so that it was very easy to get to the vast majority of Negroes because they were in some way connected with a church in the community.
Was there, in addition to your commitment to the idea of nonviolence, wasn't it also the only thing you could do, the white community having the monopoly on violence, that if you had tried violence, they would have met it with violence? It was the only device open to you, wasn't it?
Well, I'll put it another way, that morally, I was led to nonviolence because I felt that it was the best moral way to deal with the problem. We were seeking to establish a just society. And it was my feeling then, and it is my feeling now, that violence is certainly much more socially destructive, and it creates many more social problems than it solves. So I was led to nonviolence for deep moral reasons. Now, there is no doubt about the fact that in our struggle in Montgomery and all over the United States for that matter, nonviolence is also practically sound. It would just be impractical for the Negro to turn to violence. He has neither the instruments nor the techniques of violence. We are about 10 or 11% of the total population of the nation, and I would say we're about 1/10 of the firepower. So it would just be totally impractical and unwise and unrealistic for the Negro to think of violence. Well, I saw this in the beginning in Montgomery, but this wasn't the basic reason that I turned to nonviolence and that I believed in it as a philosophy. I turned to it because I felt that it was the morally excellent way to deal with the problem of racial injustice in our country.
Is there something about nonviolence that made it, and I use that in the past tense, that made it more useful among Southern Negroes than the ghetto Negroes of the North?
I wouldn't say there's anything that makes it more useful to Southern Negroes. I think it is true that we've had more nonviolent movements in the South because the problem for many years was more crystallized and, in a sense, more visible in the South. We didn't have many civil rights activities on a massive scale in the North until 3 or 4 years ago. So I would say that we just haven't had a chance to experiment on a broad scale with nonviolence in the Northern ghetto. I have the feeling that nonviolence is as applicable and workable in the Northern ghetto as it is in the South. Now, there's a larger job there. The frustrations at points are much deeper. The bitterness is deeper. And I think that's because in the South we can see pockets of progress here and there. We've really made some strides that are very visible, and every Southern Negro knows that he can do things today that he couldn't do 4 or 5 years ago. Whereas in the North, the Negro sees only retrogress, and he doesn't find it as easy to get his vision centered on his target, the target of opposition, as he does in the South. Consequently, this is made for despair and at many points cynicism, a feeling that you can't win, and it simply means that we've got to develop in the North a massive job of organization and mobilizing forces and resources to deal with the problem in the urban ghettos of the North, just as we've done it in the South.
In the South, particularly in Alabama, you had visible villains, Jim Clark, Bull Connor, cattle prods, police dogs. But in the North, you don't have those visible villains. Isn't it hard to get your people aroused and directed at something that isn't visible?
Well, that's exactly right, and this is what I was saying when I said it's harder to see a target. In the South, in the nonviolent movement, we were aided always, on the whole, by the brutality of our opponent. It isn't the same way in the North. The other thing is that you don't have legal segregation in the North as you do in the South. So it is much more difficult to get people to see exactly what you're doing, but it isn't an impossible job. It's a hard, it's a tedious job at times to get people to be aroused from their apathetic slumbers, but I still feel that Negroes in the North can be motivated just as they were motivated in the South. And I think as time goes on with the growing economic deprivation in the Negro community, it will even be easier because people will come to see that not only is something wrong in general, but something is wrong in particular in their own economic and housing situations.
Okay, pause
What
it there.
is it?
All right, so we have to pause it there. We run out of time. You can listen to that in its entirety. That's a 26-minute interview that NBC News did with Dr. King. That's at NBCnews.com. It's called Martin Luther King Jr. Speaks with NBC News 11 months before assassination. Martin Luther King Jr. Speaks with NBC News 11 months before assassination. You can Google that or go to NBCnews.com and search for that, okay? Be sure to visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All of my DVD lectures are there. My Dr. King presentation, The Distortion of the Legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Revolutionary, will not be televised on the television. That's a 2-hour presentation I've done. We have it on DVD and digital download. It's at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We also posted the information on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network. Right now, it's on sale, $10 on DVD, $8 digital download. And you can do the digital download from all around the world, okay? I'm speaking at also, you can donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show, okay? Or go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and the donations, that helps us to that helps us to finance the radio show, keep doing the research, stay on the air, pay the bills also, so do the purchase of our DVD lectures and the online courses we teach also. Monday, January 21st, 2019, I'm the keynote speaker at Second Baptist Church, located in Greektown, 441 Monroe Street, Detroit, Michigan. It's free and open to the public. The discussion, this year's theme is Coming Together in Divided Times. Coming Together in Divided Times. It's a interfaith program. There'll be breakout sessions. It's 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. 441 Monroe Street in Detroit. More information, call 313-961-0920. 313-961-0920. You can email them info@secondbaptistdetroit.org, info@secondbaptistdetroit.org. Refreshments will be served. I'm the keynote speaker as well. I speak about 1:30. I speak for about a half hour. I have my DVD lectures there as well. I will also be over at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History for their event, which starts at 7 a.m. for the breakfast. But I'll be over there. I'll be over there about 9 a.m. Over at the Charles H. Wright Museum. We'll have our DVD lectures over there as well. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, for more information. And there will be free self-parking. Free self-parking is available at Brush Street, at the Brush Street parking garage at 1001 Brush Street between Lafayette and Monroe Street, across from the Athenaeum Hotel. We have that information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, I have to get out of here, make way for Pastor Mo. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct road behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next week. Peace. All right, guys. Take care. We gotta get out of here. All right, take care. See y'all tomorrow. Those in Detroit.